Great, thank you. Let's prepare to begin this morning, please. Good morning. My name is Felicia Orth, hearing officer appointed by the Oil Conservation Commission to conduct a hearing in OCC 24683. We're on day 6 of the hearing, which began last Monday, and we have reached another public comment session. We'll take as much public comment as there is to be given before returning to the technical case this morning. Chair Chang and Commissioner Ampoma are here on the dais with me. Commissioner Bloom is on the platform. I'll ask for public comment in the room first and then turn to the platform. Just a few things about public comment. I will ask you to spell your first and last name because we're making a transcript. I will ask you, pursuant to the Commission's rulemaking rules, to swear or affirm that you will tell the truth. I will ask you to keep your oral comments to 3 minutes. If you have lots more to say, please submit your comments in writing to Sheila Apodaca, the Commission Administrator. So let's begin in the room. Who would like to offer public comment during this session? Start over here. Sir, if you would come up to the witness stand. And spell your first and last name.
Oh, that helps. D-A-L-E and last name Stahlecker, S-T-A-H-L-E-C-K-E-R.
All right, Stahlecker, thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Commissioners and gathered persons. My name is Dale Stahlecker. I'm a semi-retired wildlife biologist residing in El Dorado at Santa Fe, New Mexico. I am here to speak in support of the proposed bonding and cleanup rule changes before the Commission. Over the last 4 decades, I have spent time in all of the quote-unquote oil patches of New Mexico, from northwest to southeast. I have seen when a correctly reclaimed well pad looks like, and I have seen some that no effort has been made to reclaim them. I will repeat what you have heard and will hear again over and over again. Uncapped wells degrade our water, our air, and expose our wildlife and our humans to unhealthy conditions. Bonding for an individual well should be such that if the state is tasked with reclamation because the last owner is incapable of paying for it, that the total costs are likely to be covered by the bond. Since the current cost to the state is an average of $163,000, it makes sense that each well be bonded for close to that amount, $150,000. And it does not follow logically that 10 wells can be covered by a $150,000 bond, or that 100 wells can be covered by $250,000 bond. We, the taxpayers of New Mexico, do not exist to cover those costs with tax dollars sorely needed elsewhere, especially since the majority of well owners that avoid paying for reclamation are not New Mexico residents. If the industry drills a well, reaps profit from that well, then they must be responsible for well capping and cleanup. No exceptions. 95% capping and cleanup is not sufficient. I expect 100% of wells to be properly capped and the site rehabilitated to provide a safe environment for New Mexico's citizenry, plants, and wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stahlecker. Who would like to offer comment next? Is that you, Mr. Cross? If you would state and spell your first and last name.
My name is David Koss. My first name is David, and my last name is Coss.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start your time.
Okay. I just came this morning to put in my comments on this hearing because I've thought for a very, very long time that it's not fair for us as taxpayers to shoulder some of these cleanup costs down in the oil patch and up in the Northwest in the area up there. I've had a long career in natural resources management. I'm pretty familiar with a lot of the issues. I supervised people when I worked for the state land office that saw some of these problems on our state trust lands and how expensive they were to fill. As mayor of Santa Fe, I was often at the legislature seeking capital outlay for my community to rebuild wastewater infrastructure and roads, etc. And I was surprised sometimes to find ourselves in competition for outlay to fix things that had happened down in the oil fields, especially that giant sinkhole in Carlsbad that was not related to capping a well, but absolutely related to irresponsibility and the public being left holding the bag when it went bad. So I think it's just a matter of common sense for New Mexicans. I'm not going to question the data or the costs. That's not my realm of expertise. But as a worker in the environmental field for 30 years and as a former mayor of Santa Fe, I'd say people need to clean up their own waste. It's a highly profitable business, and I think they should be able to afford this. So I just thank you for your time, and it's very good to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Koss. Who would like to go next? Sir.
Morning.
Good morning. If you would state and spell your first and last name.
Yes, Thomas Gorman, and that's ThomasGorman.
And do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
I'll start your time.
All right. I guess I've been a longtime citizen of Santa Fe, living south of town off of Highway 14 for 35 years now. And I guess it's a basic concept for me that if you make a mess, you clean it up. And for me, the history of not making people clean up their messes, especially when they involve future destruction to the land and the environment, I think is unacceptable. So I won't say the same things you've heard already, but I'm a strong believer in what these new provisions would provide as far as making accountable those who are making the mess. Okay, that's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gorman. Who would like to go next? Anyone at all? Come on up. Oh, if you would state.
My
and spell your
name is Eleanor Eisenmenger. Eisenmenger.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead.
All right. I have a lifelong memory of pollution and polluted areas not being cleaned up, because when I was a child, I grew up, we were up near Toms River, New Jersey, which is a famous site where Seba Geigy polluted the whole area, and they had enormous health problems. And I remember one of the doctors at Toms River, New Jersey, was a friend of my parents and used to come to the house and talk with them. And I remember him once saying, I don't know what is happening, but all my patients are getting cancer. Not all, but, almost all of them. And that made a big impression on all of us. And years later, I heard that the Ciba-Geigy people had made no attempt to clean up their chemical mess, and it had absolutely polluted the whole area. This made a very deep impression on me, and I feel now that anybody who is engaging in work that causes a great deal of polluted residue, which can hurt people, cause illness, desecrate an area, should clean up their residue. And I feel that this is just another case of it, and it should not be relegated to local authorities. It's not just a matter of money. The people who have originally worked on the site have the technique and the know-how that the ordinary townspeople might not be able to muster, in addition to the financial question, which of course is important. So I feel very, very strongly, because of this lifetime memory of mine, that people should clean up their mess. It's do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Anyone else? Good morning. If you would state and spell your first and last name.
My name is Alicia Shaw, ALYSHASHAW.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Please go ahead.
Thank you so much for undertaking this critical rulemaking today. It is so important that we ensure that industry cleans up its messes and doesn't harm our state and our children and our land, our earth, and our water for future generations to come. Other industries are expected to be bonded for the full cost of remediation for their infrastructure, and it's very important to correct that so that the extraction that takes place within our state is remediated and children and communities can live and drink the water and breathe the air and use our land for the future generations to come. So thank you so much for undertaking that. And I just want to offer my comment and support.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. State and spell your first and last name.
Sure. Good morning. I'm Camilla Feibelman. It's Camilla, Camilla. Last name Feibelman, F as in Frank, E-I, B as in boy, E-L-M-A-N.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm the director of the Sierra Club's Rio Grande chapter, and I'm here to deliver close to 900 individual comments in favor of this rulemaking. These are parents, grandparents, professionals, and members of the Sierra Club. I have to admit that I had my feelings hurt when I read Jim Winchester's op-ed in the newspaper calling groups like mine radical extremists. And I thought, am I a radical extremist? So I tried to dial back to my youth. I grew up in Albuquerque, graduated from Albuquerque High School, and my mom would send me up to the Rancho del Chaparral Girl Scout camp every year. And we learned so much about how the land works and the role of forest fires in our ecosystem. And we learned about climate change and the power of methane and oil and gas to supersize the problem. So here in New Mexico, we're seeing that in relief. We are seeing generational homes and communities burned to the ground to a level and extreme where we lose our topsoil in the next rain, and our kids are carried away in flash floods when they're here on vacation. That is extreme, and it requires some radical thinking about what to do. And I think we can start by doing just this common sense updating to our financial assurances and transfer rules. And I thought, oh my gosh, is it just our environmental groups that are thinking this. So on the way up, I re-listened to the Legislative Finance Committee hearing on this issue presented by the professionals at the legislature. I saw that the State Land Office is addressing bonding in this forum, but also in their own forum. I saw that MNERD is really asking for help. And if you just look at the medium level of abandoned or orphaned wells, it's a $700 million cost. It's not the lowest cost, it's not the highest cost, but who is paying? I just dropped off my little boy at school. My stepdaughter has severe asthma, and you look at the American Lung Association rankings for smog grades in our oil and gas producing communities. And I'm thinking, okay, there's some income from oil and gas to the state, but there's also some big cost. And that's asthma, that's global warming, it's the cleanup costs, it's the impact to our air and water and climate. So I really appreciate the technical, science-based, thoughtful, financial liability approach to this hearing. We appreciate your service. These 900 members of the Sierra Club are not extremists. They're the people who brought us the national parks, the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. And we're just asking you to do the diligence that our kids, our families, and our communities require. So thank you. Thanks for your service.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Oh, thank you. Anyone else this morning in the room? Come on up. Would you state and spell your first and last name, please?
My name is Susan Martin.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, as a Sierra Club member for many years, I associate myself with our executive director's remarks and just want to remind all of us something that we were told by our parents many, many times: clean up after yourself and be responsible. This is of importance to not just the people who are here in front of us, but the people who will come after us and the next generations. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Anyone else in the room before I turn to the platform? In the room? No? All right, Sheila, let's go to the platform. Let's see, the two folks I have who indicated a desire to speak this morning from the platform are Clara Sims and Donna Detweiler. Do we have Ms. Sims?
Miss Sims is on. Let me
Okay.
find her.
Should I go ahead and speak? Sorry.
Oh, yes, hello.
Okay, hi.
If you would please spell your first and last name.
Sure. Clara, C-L-A-R-A, and Sims, S-I-M-S.
All right, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Reverend Clara Sims, and I'm speaking on behalf of New Mexico Interfaith Power and Light in strong support of the proposed bonding rule changes. At our organization, we support faith communities across New Mexico who are advocating for climate and environmental justice. On behalf of this place, our home that is sacred and beloved to us all. A recent poll about bonding shows that New Mexicans overwhelmingly support requiring corporations to pay to clean up wells when they reach their end use. Our communities understand that it is fair and it is just for the industry that is causing pollution to be responsible for addressing their own impacts and remediating the harm done to our air, land, water, and communities, especially those who are living on the front lines. As people of faith and conscience, we understand that our air, land, and water are more than resources. They are more than dollar-sign values. They are sacred elements that sustain all our lives, and without their health and integrity, there is no future. You already know from expert testimony that oil and gas corporations can drill dozens or even hundreds of wells in New Mexico while posting cleanup bonds that fall far short of the actual cost. Not only do the current bonding rules fall far short of the monetary value of cleaning up a well, the current bonding rules fall far short of a moral responsibility we all share to ensure that present and future generations do not inherit polluted air that is dangerous to breathe and polluted water that is dangerous to drink. The rule updates that are before you are a chance to finally bring policy into alignment with dignity and fairness for all New Mexicans. They are a chance to make a moral and an ethical choice on behalf of our collective present and our collective future. Please ensure that the corporations who are profiting from New Mexico's lands are fully responsible for cleaning up after themselves 100% of the time. Please help show us all that here in New Mexico, our leaders listen to the people because we all love this place we call home, and we want to help create a future that is just and fair, a future that preserves the immeasurable value of that which sustains our lives. Please vote to adopt stronger bonding rules. Thank you for your time, for your service, and for your leadership.
Thank you, Reverend Sims. Is Donna Detweiler on the platform?
I'm not seeing her, so she will need to raise her hand if she's
All right.
logged on.
If there's anyone else on the platform who would like to offer public comment during this session, please raise your virtual hand. If you have phoned in, you can press *5 to raise your hand. The next public comment session is at 4 o'clock this afternoon, and it is one of the public comment sessions in which there is an interpreter available between English and Spanish and English. That's at 4 p.m. today. So if there are no other public commenters this morning, we will return to the technical case. Thank you all very much. Mr. Cloutier, I believe you said you have a preliminary matter to discuss.
Yes, Madam Hearing Officer. IPA&M spent some time over the weekend going over its witness list in light of the way the case has come in to date. And I believe all the parties have agreed. And IPA&M is announcing that will not be calling witnesses Paget, McHugh, Bradley, Cantrell, and Andrews. We ask that their testimony be treated as written comment to the commission, and that pares down our witness list by five witnesses, and hope it enables us to finish on time, if not early. So,
All right, thank you, Mr. Cloutier. I believe I saw a variety of emails in response to your email concerning that. And I saw a number of no objections roll in, but let me pause for a moment in the event.
And let me say one thing. The only qualification was that the division approved, with the caveat that the testimony on Friday from the witness concerning Mr. Paget's testimony remain in the record, and IPA&M has no objection to that. Otherwise, all the parties agree. The other parties all agreed. I kept the tally, but you're welcome to pull them if you wish.
I was just going to pause for a moment in the event someone wanted to speak up, and I did see Mr. Tremaine's caveat. So thank you for
just
that.
One minor clarification. So I completely agree with Mr. Cloutier. Mr. Powell's rebuttal did touch on other witnesses. So I would phrase it as we have not withdrawn Mr. Powell's rebuttal from Friday.
All right. Thank you.
And IPA&M has absolutely no objection to
All right. Thank you very much. And would you repeat? Sorry, I wasn't taking notes fast enough. Repeat the names of the
I'll go slowly. It's Paget, McHugh, Bradley,
Cantrell,
and Andrews.
Andrews. Oh, got it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Are there any other preliminary matters before we turn to Mr. Powell's rebuttal? No? All right. Thank you all. Mr. Tremaine?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I just want to start out this morning by welcome back everyone. Monday morning, week 2. I want to thank the commission and all the parties for the accommodations last week. OCD staff is spread out throughout a very large state. We had some treacherous commutes. So I think that was quite sportsmanly, and I appreciate it very much. We're prepared to move on with Mr. Powell's rebuttal. Good morning, Mr. Powell.
Good morning.
You're still under oath. I want to ask you a couple of questions. Moving on to rebuttal related to the rebuttal testimony of Mr. Winchester. Madam Hearing Officer, I'd like to share screen.
Sheila? Oh, thank you.
Looks like we've got it. All right. So, Mr. Powell, I'm going to direct you to page 1, line 12. Where Mr. Winchester states, in particular, I believe that there is information in that exhibit, referring to exhibit 17, which indicates that some of the wells should no longer be classified as orphan wells under any rational definition of that term, and to observe that there are other wells listed that are not going to be affected, carrying over to page 2, by this rulemaking, and never would have been affected by the state of New Mexico financial assurance requirements. How do you respond?
I would respond to that. Exhibit 17 is a reporting spreadsheet of actions OCD has taken. After we get a hearing, after we get a settlement agreement, wells go on that list. There's not a true definition of orphan. That list is to show wells that OCD has plugging authority on. Some of those wells will end up being plugged by other entities, but it's wells OCD has already taken action on. It's not and we'll get into this further down, but it's not a tool that's looking at future enforcement action. It's where its actions already been taken for enforcement action. Regarding what are classified in there are wells that are plugged, not released, and I believe that's some of the things Mr. Winchester is alluding to. The Reed estate that Rosa showed earlier last week is a well that was plugged, I believe in 2015 is what the testimony was. I haven't looked that one up personally, that we had to go back on and do remediation, and that remediation was expensive. So wells, even in that condition, doesn't mean we don't still have to do something. I can say historically, OCD has used financial assurance for not only the plugging, but the remediation of the well. Equipment that's on site, those kind of things. Rough example, and this isn't any well, if a well, say, had $100,000 in financial assurance and it cost $50,000 in plugging, would we really give that other $50,000 back to the company or the financial institution to then go use other funds to pay for the other $50,000 in cleanup if it needed? That makes fundamentally no sense when everything is tied to that well.
Going to move on to page 4, line 11, where Mr. Winchester states, thus, this indication indicates that at least the plugging work and perhaps all the work has been done on this site to move the well to plugged site released status once the division inspects the well and finalizes the appropriate paperwork. Under my definition, these wells are close and perhaps just lacking paperwork to being former orphan wells. And the status above on line 8 that Mr. Winchester is referring to is plugged site released. You may have just answered this question, but how do you respond?
So just to expound on what I mentioned earlier, just because a well is in plugged, not released, it's not as simple as going and doing an inspection. A lot of times an environmental assessment is done of that site. We're looking for staining. Currently, because of schedules, rig schedules, the environmental groups are the ones removing tank batteries, removing dehives, removing separators, removing associated equipment with that well. That work still has to be done at the environmental side of it before that inspection can occur. So there can be significant costs of that well, even after the well bore is plugged, that are associated with that well.
All right, Mr. Powell, I'm going to refer you to page 5 of Mr. Winchester's rebuttal testimony, line 8, where he states, as I testified, most operators are responsible and plug their uneconomic wells, rounding to the nearest whole number. 3/4 of the wells listed on OCD Exhibit 17 are or were operated by 10 operators as follows. And then he includes a list of 10 operators from the Moss. How do you respond?
So I think what using moss for versus what it's actually used for, and then we can dive into, I think, a broader scope, is moss, again, is where OCD has taken action to perform reviews, or received hearing orders, received settlement agreements that have allowed us to put wells on that list. That's not the full scope of what OCD sees as potential enforcement or going through the process of that. I believe we've got something we can pull up that shows some of that enforcement mechanisms that OCD is reviewing and looking at that, because in the Exhibit 17, I think they have listed 1,371 wells. That is wells that are on that list where action's been taken. If you don't mind, can you please pull up the operators list that haven't submitted C-115s?
I'm sharing on screen now, Madam Hearing Officer, demonstrative aid, which is distributed to the parties last Friday, which Mr. Powell prepared as demonstrative for Sir rebuttal. Please explain.
So what this list is this is actually one of the lists that we use to look at enforcement mechanisms. It's not the Moss list. So what this list is it's a truncated version of unsubmitted C-115s that OCD can run to find operators that aren't even reporting production. So this list is pared down to operators that haven't reported production since August of 2024. And if you scroll down the list, you'll be able to actually see that's just a portion as far as a date. Some of these dates go back years of non-production. This is a list of operators that aren't even reporting production to the state in over a year. So when you add up all of this is a far greater number than what we included even in Moss. But these are operators that aren't complying with basic reporting criteria. So looking at this, and it was brought up in Cross, where I think somebody mentioned maybe 20 wells in Moss, or 20 operators in Moss, and that at 30%, it was going to be a little over 100 operators. In this list, we've got 113 operators that aren't even reporting production in the state. 76 of those own state and private wells. So 113 are going to be affected by the presumption of no beneficial use. 76 will have to bond their wells. And that's just not reporting production since August of last year. What that looks like in far as wells that are totally out of compliance is 2,318 that include state, private, and federal wells. 1,213 of those are state and private wells only. So 1,213 wells just there would require the bonding and then a potential presumption of no beneficial use. Again, this isn't the whole spectrum of reviews. If IPA&M would have reached out to discuss what OCD is looking at in enforcement, we could provided some of our enforcement mechanisms to them to look at. Another one is Exhibit 16 minus the O column that we provided as a exhibit here. When we originally pulled that wasn't for this rulemaking. That was to pull to see where operators were and operating in the state as far as production, what their wells looked like, what their wells didn't look like. Hillcorp we discussed was one of those. We found that there was over 100 wells by Hillcorp, and this can be pulled up in Exhibit 16 as needed, but there was over 100 wells on that by Hillcorp that had less than 10 BOE of production for the year and less than 10 days of production. I think the lowest one was like 0.1677, so I'm guessing they reported 1 MCF for the year. That is another enforcement mechanism that the OCD looks at when evaluating where to go with enforcement criteria. So based on the unsubmitted C-115s and then based on Exhibit 16 and looking at it, there's potentially thousands of wells out there right now that will fall under this that, again, aren't even making that basic principle of production as far as what they're looking at, what they're producing. Again, if an operator produces 180 days, this rule doesn't apply for anything as far as bonding or presumption of no beneficial use. And if a well's not even capable of that because of mechanical issues, those kind of things, then the operators should be looking at that well and what they're going to do with it. Again, Exhibit 16 is production through the state. It's a really powerful tool. I believe it's been filed in this case record since August. If industry would have reached out, we could have provided that. I'm also would like to go through a walkthrough of how that can be used as an enforcement mechanism to show, based on Winchester's testimony, what we're really looking at as far as operator compliance.
So, Mr. Powell, just a clarification before you move through any walkthroughs or further explanation. Just want to clarify for the commission, is it true that there is some overlap between the unsubmitted C-115 report and the MOS, specifically that some subset of the operators on this single tool are in fact already included on the MOS? For instance, Canyon E&P Company is on both.
Absolutely. There's actually almost all of the operators are on MOS, if not all of them are on this list. You know, one of the things we do is looking at the best bang for our buck because we're strapped as far as capacities as well. So you'll see a lot of the operators with the higher number of wells we've already taken action against. You'll also see a lot of operators with 1, 2, 3 wells. It takes OCD as much time to pursue compliance on an operator with 1 well as it does just on the screen that's being shown for Canyon at 203 wells. It takes as much hearing time, pulling lists, those kind of things to take all of those. So we're working down the list just on these, but we know based on this Exhibit 16 that this is just a starting point.
So, Mr. Powell, this demonstrative aid lists wells that are universally required to be plugged under the existing rule right now.
Potentially, because it would still have to go through hearings, so we don't have plugging orders on all of these wells. But every well in the state is required to report production monthly, and that's due 45 days after that month. So these wells, 2,318 wells, are out of compliance on a per well basis for every month since their last production. So if you look at some of that at the bottom, I'll pick the first one with a state and private well, Southwest Inc. They haven't reported any production since 2009. Every month since 2009, those 3 wells have been out of compliance in the state.
So if you take this list and you remove all of the operators for which OCD's already resolved plugging authority, will OCD still have a substantial number of individual enforcement actions under the current rule, not the proposed rule, but the current rule?
Absolutely. If testimony earlier last week was true that there's roughly 20 operators, again, I didn't run those numbers, but if there's 20 operators on MOS, we've got roughly another 90 operators to go as far as compliance just with the production. The goal of this rule with the bonding is to get some bonding in place so the operators were, one, either addressing their wells as they start to become non-productive, or have bonding in place so when we get to those wells that we can actually plug those wells efficiently. Because as it sits right now, the world of what we're looking at is far greater than what's on the Moss spreadsheet.
And Mr. Powell, we're talking right now about inactive wells and unsubmitted C-115s. Do you agree that this discussion does not reach to OCD's concerns for those wells which are on the verge of inactivity?
No, that's where Exhibit 16 is so powerful, is because that's what's showing production in the state in FY24. Industry, anybody can take that list. And because that list was intended for all production in the state, the commission to see what production was in the state on a well-by-well basis. You can use filters on that, and I'll show some filters in just a moment on how easy that is to navigate and check for compliance. You can use filters to see where they're at. Each individual company can check their own information and see really where that's at. And that number is far greater than even what we're showing on the unsubmitted C-115s or Moss.
Madam Hearing Officer, Mr. Powell has proffered that he would like to run through some examples on the replacement Exhibit 16, if that pleases the commission.
All right, thank you very much.
He will need to share screen from his laptop as opposed to mine. You do not want me following Mr. Powell's instructions in Excel.
So let me get to that so I can share. I'm used to working with multiple screens, so I apologize. It's taking me just a moment to share my screen. Okay, so this is example Exhibit 16. This is the exhibit that, again, everybody's had since August. Again, we're excluding the column O that was previously provided, but all the source data is still the same. You can still go and filter it. You can change filters by company. You can change filters by BOE. You can change lots of different filters. One of the filters that we're going to look at is we've pulled new numbers. We'll offer them later to replace what Mr. Garcia showed earlier. But I want to show how easy it is to use this when checking a company by company's experience or status. So I'm going to go in, and I was kind of surprised one of the companies was testifying. It was Marion Oil and Gas, because they're a company that's always been known to have a high reputation in industry and in the community. So I wanted to see what effect this would have on them. So let's go to companies, and we're going to filter just by that one company. So I'm going to go Marion Oil and Gas. So next is, because this affects different well types, different ways potentially, I'm going to check they only have oil and gas wells. And then I'm going to go over to BOE. I'm going to do a filter. We're going to do the big one first as far as the high volumes. So I want one that is greater than or equal to 90. And I'm going to do one is less than 1,000. So in that criteria, there are 6 wells that pop up. As you can see, days in production, all 6 of them are above 180 days. So that means none of those wells are going to require any additional bonding. They are producing those wells. There's constant production in those wells. Even though the BOE is below as currently written, those would require no bonding. If we remove the days, then 6 wells total, and I believe they had 60 wells, would require bonding. But as it's currently written, none of those wells would require that. So we check that one. I'm going to clear that filter, and I'm going to look now at BOE under 90. So we're going to do less than, or actually we're going to do a custom filter Because again, 0 doesn't, that's already inactive. That's already something that's under OCD's purview. So we're going to pick is greater than 0, is less than 90. So they have one well spud in 1964 that is in that criteria. So that well in 2024 produced 15 days and 19 BOE. I want to show now how easy it is to look to see kind of what's going on with that well. So I'm going to pull up on our website. I'm going to go to the publicly viewable website. So it's not any tricks or anything that anybody can't do. I'm going to go to OCD permitting. I'm going to go to operator data. I'm going to go to searches. I'm sorry. I'm going to go to wells. And I'm going to enter in that API number. Again, I'm doing this live and I don't have that good of memory. So 12174. So we're going to pull up that single wells information. I'm going to go to the production on the right. And as you can see, this well has a long history of production. That production continued fairly steadily till about 2015. Looks like they had a potential issue in 2016. There was some production in 2017 through 2019. And then there's been very little production since. Looks like there's some production in 2025 back. But the production volumes is far below what it was prior to 2015. And on historical wells decline curves, a lot of folks have told me that are experts that at the end of life, your decline curve is usually fairly solid. And so you're expecting consistent decline through a well. So it appears something's going on potentially with that well. When we pull up that well files to see what's been reported, to see if we can explain, is it a pipeline issue? Is it something else? We pull up the associated images. The last image submitted to OCD was in 2010 and nothing since. So the 2015's not on there. The current issues aren't on there. What was going on in 2024 isn't on there. So OCD as it sits has no idea what's going on in that well. So this well would get a presumption of no beneficial use. And it could be productive. It could just be towards the end of its life. And Marion could say, we're coming back, we're producing this one 181 days. And so we don't get that presumption of no beneficial use. And that would be fine. But as it sits right now, we don't have that data. But looking at a company that's historically has been known to be a reputable company, they have one well that this rule applies to. Also, unless the commission or somebody'd like me to go through it, Marion, I don't believe has plugged a well since 2022. So Marion, in their due diligence in plugging and taking care of their wells, hasn't needed to plug a well in the last 3 to 4 years. And they still only have one well on this list that would apply.
Mr. Powell, is that demonstration and your discussion of the Marion wells, is that consistent with OCD's intent when it proposed the, risk proxy production thresholds?
It was. The OCD intentionally tried to pick volumes low enough that if an operator is operating prudently, is not going to be affected by this rule negatively, that they can continue to operate. What OCD intended to try to capture in this rulemaking is operators that aren't operating prudently, that don't have 25 or 50% production in a year. It's similar to having a business that you shutter the doors 75 or 50% of the year. That just doesn't make good business sense. Those mineral owners aren't making any mineral rights during that time. Again, as we discussed earlier, 40% of the inactive well list is private wells. That's typically private minerals that mineral owner isn't getting any reimbursement for their minerals, but it's still holding the lease so no other operators can go in there and explore those mineral rights.
Madam Hearing Officer, I'd share screen again and move back to my questions on SIR rebuttal. Mr. Powell, I'm looking at page, let's see, just moving a little further down the page, line 14, Mr. Winchester states, the OCD submitted 3 other lists of wells in exhibits 21, 22, and 23 that for which there was little to no explanatory testimony from any of the OCD witnesses. Mr. Powell, how do you respond and what's the purpose of those 3 exhibits?
So those 3 exhibits are wells that aren't producing, plain and simple, through different mechanisms. We actually expected more dialogue on those potentially with industry of kind of where those were at. Those wells are 3 lists. One is inactive wells excluding TA or ACOI wells. One's a list of inactive wells that include the ACOI wells, and one's an inactive list including the TA wells, to show that those are the wells that aren't being productive. The TA wells have X number of wells that aren't producing. The ACOIs have X number of wells that the division has agreed to with an operator to correct how many wells they're remediating at any particular time. But those 3 lists are simply wells that aren't producing in New Mexico today.
And Mr. Powell, do you agree that if a member of the public were to go to OCC's website and run a similar report, that report would be exported in a printable form such as PDF as is the form in which they were provided to the commission and the parties?
Yes, and if I remember correctly, and it's been a day since I've done that, but you run the inactive well list on compliance on the OCD's permitting website that I just showed, going to the other well information. It pulls up a list of wells, and so you don't have to page through each one of those. You can export it to Excel, and I believe that's what I did.
Moving on, I'd like to draw your attention to page 8. Line 2, where Mr. Winchester states, as reported on July 1st, 2025, OCD has again recovered $0 from bond forfeitures, making it 5 years out of the last 7 with $0 from financial assurance bonds. How do you respond?
My understanding is OCD has recovered bonds since that are within the last 5 or 7 years. We've pursued some, I believe, with Kano. There's some out there that we've pursued. That's typically done through our legal group, but I am aware that we have claimed some bonds. We haven't gone after as many bonds as we have wells plugged at this point. Simply, Canyon's a great example. On Canyon, they have a lot of bonding, I believe, if memory serves me correctly. We can look at Moss that were under $10,000 per individual well bond. So it makes sense to do those in packages because we're working with the same financial institution. So instead of pursuing 100 wells 100 times, we can pursue 100 wells 1, 2, or 3 times and send that financial institution all the supporting data to get that, because we can't pull those bonds until after a well's plugged. And when we call that financial information, we have to actually submit over what we did on those wells, the plugging invoices, those kind of things, so they can reimburse us for that money that we then put back in the reclamation fund.
And Mr. Powell, do you agree and acknowledge that the Kano bond forfeiture has not been updated in OCD permitting?
Yes, that was my understanding.
And is OCD updating that information in earnest?
Yes, we are.
Okay. And do you agree that the other bond forfeitures you referenced are pending as we speak?
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. One moment. Mr. Powell, I'd like to refer you to page 10, Mr. Winchester's rebuttal testimony, line 10. Yes, OCD exhibits 17, 21, 22, and 23 also contain a number of wells that are subject to federal or tribal jurisdiction and therefore outside the scope of this rulemaking proceeding. How do you respond?
So let's start with the latter first, tribal jurisdiction. This rulemaking won't affect tribal jurisdiction. If operators come to us and say the tribal nation doesn't want anything to happen on those wells, nothing will happen on those wells. As far as presumption of no beneficial use, those kind of things. I will note that on Moss, there are some tribal wells in there where the tribe has come forward and asked us to plug wells for them using funding because they didn't have any. So there are tribal wells in Moss that OCD has plugged. Regarding federal, so that's kind of a two-part answer. On the bonding, OCD doesn't bond federal wells. So the bonding portion of the federal wells will not apply. But the presumption of no beneficial use does apply. However, if an operator gets a presumption of no beneficial use and they have an agreement with the BLM to show that there is some beneficial use to that well, that's something that they can submit with their information showing a beneficial use to the state that the state would then look at.
One moment as I flip through. All right. Mr. Powell, I'm going to direct you to page 17. Sorry for the scrolling. And on line 18 of page 17 of Mr. Winchester's rebuttal testimony, this carries over onto the next page. I'm going to put this up on the screen here rather than I'll read a subset of it, but I just want to refer you to this entire question and ask you if you've reviewed this section of Mr. Winchester's rebuttal testimony.
I have.
Okay. Specifically, I want to draw your attention to page 18, line 6, and I'll quote, I have had members inquire whether some sort of fix is in on this rulemaking, and the division has foreknowledge that the commission will adopt at least certain portions of the rulemaking despite opposition. Further, Mr. Winchester states, I find it quite troubling that the division is promulgating forms or requiring operator certification based on either the division's extra regulatory judgment or provisions on proposed rulemaking that this commission has not adopted. And just as a reminder, the section here is referring to the Oil Conservation Division's change of facility operator form promulgated by the division. Mr. Powell, how do you respond?
I would respond. I think Mr. Winchester's members think we're far more nefarious than we are. This process had absolutely zero to do with this rulemaking. This process was actually contingent or a outgrowth of Part 27, which is the methane reporting rule. It's the first rule that ever required any facilities to be reported or registered to companies that we actually used that registration and rule. What we found is there was hundreds, if not potentially thousands of facilities out there that were registered to one operator that were actually owned by another operator. So what we were trying to do is create a process where operators could transfer their facilities from one operator to the other, and we could have something on record. The percentage of operator, or if you scroll to the prior page, I want to make sure I quote this right. The no person with an interest exceeding 25% in the undersigned company information, that is required when an operator first registers with the state. And I think it would be ludicrous to say, well, once you register, you don't have to comply with that anymore. The second part is every operator that's performed a well transfer in the state for years has initialed this as part of their well transfers, because the source form that we used to create the facility operator form was from the well transfer form. It's an existing form. We were trying to duplicate the existing process for facilities tied with those existing wells. Again, these facilities are tied to the wells that they're using that on. has zero to do with this rulemaking. We didn't even look at connecting the two dots. What we were trying to do is facilitate a request from operators to transfer facilities so they could properly report under Part 27.
I'm going to stop sharing screen now. Mr. Powell, did you watch the testimony of Mr. John Garcia?
I did.
I'm going to refer you to, do you recall the questions? I'll refer to and/or gate.
I did.
Did you prepare a response to and/or gate?
I did, but I didn't use and or because I can't write code near as well as John Garcia does.
Okay. I'm going to share screen to offer as a demonstrative the exhibit that Mr. Powell has prepared. Mr. Powell, is this the demonstrative that you have prepared in response to that line of questions?
It does. It goes through and updates the numbers based on the understanding in the rule. I think scatter plot really well demonstrates this, but this gives the actual number to it. As you can see, I tried to show how I filtered these without writing and or code. So 0 BOE, that's just going in that FY24 spreadsheet, and anything that was listed as an oil or gas well, because that's the overall filter, that had 0 BOE is that number. Next, we move to the greater than 0, just like we did in the Marion case, and less than 90 BOE. That's the 3914. And then if you add anything that's less than 90 days is 1842. So it reduces that number from 3,900 to 1,800. Going to the higher allotment, so above the presumption of no beneficial use, I did the 90 to 1,000 or less than 1,000. There's 11,551. And then when you add the less than 180 days, it filters that down to 1,652. So what I did is accumulate at the bottom. If you removed the number of days produced, there would be potentially 15,465 wells affected today. If you keep it as it's written currently, there's 3,494 wells that are affected by this rulemaking potentially.
And Mr. Powell, just to clarify for foundation and the understanding of the commission, is it accurate that you utilized, when you applied these filters, they were applied to the replacement exhibit 16, which we referred to earlier in the hearing?
They were, and I would quote, there was one couple stars at the bottom. The first star is in that exhibit 16. Again, we had pulled that originally for another enforcement overview, not for this rulemaking. It does include federal wells, and I think I actually had a typo and says this does exclude, that should be include federal land types that would be unaffected by bonding requirements, because this was all wells in the state. So anything that's on federal wouldn't be affected by the bonding subtypes, and anything that's tribal wouldn't be affected at all. So when we look at that 3494, the number is probably significantly less than that, because you then have to exclude the federal bonding requirements and then exclude any tribal wells.
So Mr. Powell, when we're talking about exhibit 16, I believe you've been clear, but that's using 2024 production data, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so looking at these numbers today, so things could have changed if production was reported since that time, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We just had the 2024 because I pulled that for other enforcement, and then also this rulemaking had started, so we started using that for our evaluation.
It's our baseline for comparison.
Yep.
So barring any changes from reported production, this graphic stands for the proposition that there are 2,489 wells that would need to be plugged under current rule.
Correct. That would be the assumption.
Okay. And that there are 1,842 additional wells that would potentially receive a presumption of no beneficial use from the division.
Correct.
And that there are 1,652 wells that would be required to provide individual single well financial assurance if the proposed rule were promulgated?
That would be the maximum amount. Again, it would take in consideration the federal wells and the tribal wells, so I would expect that to actually be lower.
By what, about half?
Federal wells account for 50% of the wells in the state. But again, inactive wells are 40%. It would depend on how operators are treating when you're looking at that category, how they're treating the federal and state wells. It could be a higher percentage than half, or it could be half.
Do you recall your earlier testimony and answer rebuttal testimony regarding proposed concerns with the way in which operators report days of production currently?
I did.
And would you provide any input for the commission from the division's perspective on whether there's a benefit to including the days component or the viability of striking the days component?
I think the including the days component is a noble effort. I think it's really what the division and the applicant is trying to accomplish is making sure operators are operating their wells prudently. I do think there's some instances where that's currently being abused that may change in the future, where say an operator says they're operating their well 200 plus days and they're still producing very, very little. I think if we keep it as written, the division is probably going to have to look into those scenarios to find out if it's true days production or if there's something else going on as far as data quality. If the days are removed and we're looking at the bigger scope, then that obligation would fall on operators when they respond to the presumption of no beneficial use, stating how they're using that well. So either way, potentially that days in production is going to have to be investigated in the future, whether it's something the operator uses as their justification for beneficial use, or whether it's something that the OCD has to look at and make sure it's not being abused.
Mr. Powell, do you recall the testimony and cross-examination of Lauren Dede and Rosa Ramiro?
I do.
Do you recall lines of questions regarding the rate of occurrence of extreme examples?
I do.
How do you respond to the assertion that OCD deals with such examples only rarely?
So I've been with the division for 19 and a half years. Extreme examples pop up more regularly than I would hope for. Those were, I think, examples that popped up in the last year and a half. I think that was fairly clarified with other people's experiences. I can say as of Friday, when I was sitting here testifying, the division was dealing with another extreme case where we've currently got a well with well control issues. We've got 900 PSI on the casing and the tubing when we moved on. We had a well control, both a plugging group, environmental group, and an extreme well control group on that well. This well was a few hundred yards from the Pecos River. We were out there building berms to contain the fluid so it didn't flow in the river. We had a well control group that was on the well trying to get control of the wellhead. When we tried calling the company, both of their numbers were disconnected. They had 7 out of 8 wells listed as inactive in the system. It's something we were actively responding to as I was sitting up there, that I would call this as an extreme case as well. That happened on Friday, that we responded to on Friday and throughout the weekend. To me, this is very similar to what we were dealing with Buckeye, high pressures, flow issues. The wellhead was corroded to the point where we can't shut that well in. So now we're flowing it to a frac tank and continuing to empty out the frac tank. We're reviewing actions to see what we can do with that well, whether it's freeze the top of the well with nitrogen so we can replace the wellhead and get well control, what we're going to do. But we're likely going to be starting that well plugging tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, before we even put a rig on that well, to be able to address that well. And those are just the things that come up from this from time to time. We had industry out there, Devon attempting to assist with us, Conoco attempting to assist on this to see what experience that they could provide. And I really appreciate industry stepping up to help where they can. To be honest, if Devon hadn't shown up, the water probably would have hit the Pecos River before we got any crew on site. So I appreciate industry stepping up and helping in those ways. And this well, it's not a deep well. It's 5,000 feet. I don't know where the pressure is coming from. I don't know the situation. I believe it's an older well, but I haven't looked up the spud date. But those are the type of scenarios OCD responds to.
Mr. Powell, was that well subject to a pre-existing settlement or plugging order?
No, it was not.
Did OCD have to issue an emergency order regarding that well?
We did.
Okay. Have you looked to see what the last reported production was by that operator?
I have not.
Okay.
I've been up here instead of looking at through case files.
All right. One moment, Madam Hearing Officer. Madam Hearing Officer, I believe that resolves Mr. Powell's SIR rebuttal. I would proffer the referenced demonstrative aids as SIR rebuttal exhibits. If approved, I will label those as SIR rebuttal exhibits and resubmit to all the parties and the clerk. And I would also now move for admission of replacement exhibit 16.
Thank you. I'll pause for a moment in the event there are objections to the SIR rebuttal demonstrative aids or replacement exhibit 16.
No objections from NMOGA, Madam Hearing Officer.
Madam Hearing Officer, I just have one question. When you said that, Mr. Tremaine, the demonstrative exhibits A, does that include the first demonstrative A and then the and or gate demonstrative, both those?
Yes, so to clarify, I can share screen if that would be beneficial so we know what we're talking about here. Because I haven't done SIR rebuttal processes much, so I wasn't sure on procedure here. So I believe we're going to be starting at exhibit 32, but I'll clarify. So I would probably mark this demonstrative with the BOE and the impacted number of wells as 32, but I reserve that. And then the unsubmitted C-115s, I believe that will be exhibit 33. So those are the two SIR rebuttal exhibits, and then just admission of replacement exhibit 16.
Great. Thank you for that clarification.
Could we get the the other one, Jesse? There was a typo. It said exclude instead of include. Could we get the typo fixed before we submit it as an exhibit?
Let me put it up and make sure that Mr. Powell can address that since is this the right one, Mr. Cloutier?
It is.
Yes. This does exclude on the first asterisk, and I think if I understood Mr. Powell correctly, it should say this does include.
Or does not exclude.
Yeah,
that is correct.
All right. Great. You just added it. All right.
All right.
Thank you very much. All right. I think I've paused sufficiently long to hear any objections. So SIR rebuttal exhibit 32 and 33 from the division are admitted, and replacement exhibit 16 is admitted. See, it's 10:15. Should we take a short break before we begin cross?
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Let's come back at 10:30. All righty, let's come back from the break, please. Mr. Cloutier, do you have questions of Mr. Powell?
I think Mr. Swazo was planning to go first, if that's all right, Madam Hearing
That's
Officer.
fine. Mr. Swazo.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Mr. Powell, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Miguel Suazo. I'm with Beatty and Wozniak, and I represent the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association. And I wanted to start some questions for you, because I think that some of the things that you said on your direct and sir rebuttal were illuminating to industry. And I'd like to better understand, kind of where you're coming from, so we can all kind of contextualize where we are in this proceeding and why. It's fair to say that OCD supports WELC, the applicant's proposal in this rulemaking, correct?
Correct, as written.
Okay. And listening to WELC's testimony and reviewing their exhibits, they make numerous references to provisions in their proposed rule that were, I guess, essentially proposed by the division itself, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And is it accurate that applicants, WELC, adopted much of the language that was proposed by OCD?
They did.
But some of that language was only from WELC itself, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So given the nature of this rulemaking, which is heavily focused on financial assurances and plugging of wells, which are really integral to the work that OCD does because of its technical and regulatory expertise, I think industry would like to know why the division itself is not the applicant in this case.
I would say WELC is the one that applied first. There was definitely a need for it. WELC applied, and I believe the first application WELC made, there was some things in there we either didn't agree with or we thought could potentially be done differently. So we drafted up a revised suggestion to WELC. They accepted most of what we had submitted. That was actually brought up in a meeting, I think initially with WELC and industry in the same meeting, to propose what OCD was looking at doing and why they were proposing the things that they were proposing to tackle the same issues.
Okay. And when did the division first receive a copy of the proposed rule changes from applicants?
Man, that's a long time ago. I'm trying to go off memory. I know it was probably at least when it was initially applied for, but I don't know if we've seen one before they applied.
Did you hear WELC's witnesses explain to the commission that WELC had been working with the division for at least a year before the rules were actually filed?
I don't remember them working with us for a year for the rule specifically. I know they were working with us in some of the legislative fixes that I believe MNERD was trying to do. I think they also had some general conversations with us, but I don't believe in writing the original rule. We were part of that. Matter of fact, that's probably why we made the suggestions we did after the rule was filed, because we had suggestions after seeing that version.
Okay. Now, traditionally, when the division itself is the applicant for a rulemaking, isn't there a period of time when the division would kind of do a thorough job of scoping the rulemaking and seek input from industry?
I think it depends on the rulemaking. I've seen it work both ways, where there's some initial meetings, some initial follow-up. Depends on the gravity of it. Usually large rulemakings, yes.
Okay. And would you consider this a large rulemaking?
Yes.
Yeah, I think industry would as well. And so I think, from industry standpoint, can you appreciate how industry might perceive the fact that because the division is not the applicant in this case, it's WELC and another group of parties, how engaging for purposes of this rulemaking might be a little different than if the division was the applicant?
If I was industry, I probably would have engaged more, simply because the more engagement you have up front, the better understanding and trying to come to a better place. I know when we had that initial meeting that I was in, industry was there. We stated what we were trying to do as far as the volumes and some of the things. And industry in that meeting stated that they would look at it and get back with us. We didn't hear back from most of industry. OCC did reach out, and we found some consensus in some of what we do. And I think there's potentially going to be some more consensus as it comes up in this rulemaking. But I think engagement helps understanding. And even if wealth and say NMOGA wasn't directly interacting, because of the OCD's involvement, if a NMOGA had reached out and said, you know, Exhibit 16, what is that? What are you looking at? I think we could have had at least some of that dialogue and understanding here, as was obvious in Mr. Winchester's testimony. I don't think that understanding was there, and I think it could have cleared a lot of that up even before this process started this last week.
So I keep hearing from you and from Welk's witnesses and from OCD counsel, we were expecting to hear, we were hoping to hear, we want industry to engage, you know, and on and on. And I want to know if you as the deputy director are aware that NMOGA did not get a copy of the rules that were ultimately submitted to the division until a week before they were actually submitted. Are you aware of that?
I don't know if we got a copy either, but because we got the copy, because the rulemaking was filed and it's an important rule, we made the time to make sure that we read it, we understood it, and we wanted to make sure we provided follow-up. And I would say even off that first submission to then what was ultimately brought in this case was a significant difference in language and some of what was looked at based on that feedback and that back and forth.
Well, I think industry would want to have that same understanding as the division. And I would hope that the division and the commission can appreciate that when that rulemaking is put in front of NMOGA a week before it's ultimately filed, can't the division appreciate that that gives a trade association made up of hundreds of member companies with different perspectives and, you know, things like that, time to vet the actual rule before it's actually on the record?
I'm sure it was a vast undertaking, but I don't think even a reach out on basic information was made as well. I don't believe after the revision was placed that we received reach out and discussion on any of the points to even try to understand them, let alone change them.
Well, I think, you know, is it fair to ask whether you could appreciate that once the rule is submitted on the record and your ideas supported by the division are essentially what are proposed, how it's more challenging for industry to engage constructively to better shape the rules that are already in front of the commission for consideration?
I appreciate that. This is a big rule. I don't know that NMOGA asked for an extension to any of the rulemaking to evaluate that. I don't know if there was efforts to reach out that maybe I didn't see, because it is a big rulemaking, but I don't know that NMOGA tried to extend the timing to try to get a better understanding, any of that. You know, at the end of the day, rulemaking is set a certain way by statute, and we have to follow that, I would imagine. Again, I don't know those rules offhand. That's for OCC to ensure, and the attorneys in the room to ensure we're making those milestones. But I don't know of any request for extension or extension of time to get additional understanding that were made.
And I don't want to belabor this point any further, Mr. Powell, but would it surprise the division to know that NMOGA did not get a copy of the complete rulemaking until after it was filed?
Again, I don't think OCD did either.
Okay. So I want to move on to statutory authority for new bonding categories. And this is in your rebuttal slides. You rely on statute 70-2-14A for the authority to create new categories of financial assurance, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And the statute says that OCD, and I quote, shall establish categories of financial assurance. Is that right?
That sounds correct.
Okay. But would you agree that that same statute also caps blanket bonding at $250,000?
I would say it caps that specific category.
There's no express statutory language authorizing a $150,000 per well bond, though, in that statute, is there?
I would say not expressly, but it does give a test at the end if you meet other sets of criteria that other categories can be created.
Okay. So is it fair then to say that what you're really relying on is the division's own interpretation of what is meant by categories?
So I'm not a lawyer, so I don't try to interpret statutes. I try to use them and see how they're being used. But I would say that the way the statute is written, it says the division shall create categories. It gives a few categories that are standard or given as examples. And then it states a list of items if you're to establish new categories that you have to fulfill.
Okay, so bottom line is you think that you can create categories based upon the division's own interpretation of that statute?
I don't know that it's the division's own interpretation. I just think it's plain language with what's in there.
Okay. Now, you also discussed the Legislative Finance Committee's recommendations as support. Would you acknowledge that those recommendations are basically advisory only?
Yeah, I think they were advising us to promulgate rules.
Okay. But the LFC does not have any of its own regulatory authority, correct?
No, but again, I think they found a problem that we also then seen and looked at, and their advisement was to promulgate rules, and that's what we're doing here.
Okay. Now, in your direct, you testified that OCD's average orphan well plugging costs justify a $150,000 bond, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And OCD plugs the most challenging wells, according to your testimony, and those costs, and that's why those costs are higher, correct?
I wouldn't state that. I think we look to find wells that are the most protective as far as what we're doing, ranking, those kind of things. And then we also plug other wells in the vicinity of those wells so we can help avoid MOB, demob costs. A lot of the challenging aspects that we're seeing that contribute to cost aren't things that we even seen on the surface to make that well a challenging well. Example of that is a gas leaking out of a wellhead. You know, we're going to try to move onto that well to get the gas stopped, but that's not going to tell you that we've got a casing shear downhole that we can't get over, say, 2,000 feet into the well bore, and we're trying to mill, we're trying to do some of those jobs. So the superficial aspects of the well that we would be ranking off of aren't the aspects that cost the most.
Okay. So then I guess I'm trying to understand why the $150,000 bonding is necessary, as you're saying, because on the one hand, you're doing the most challenging wells, but on the other hand, you're doing, I guess, more wells that are, you know, of higher priority to the division for whatever reason, correct?
No, I think I stated that we're trying to move on the wells that, again, have the biggest surface impact.
Okay.
But the surface impact doesn't necessarily contribute to your downhole costs.
Right.
The downhole costs, we've moved on to wells we didn't think we're going to have much downhole costs that end up costing a lot. I think I gave that in my examples of two wells. We didn't expect to cost a lot when we moved on. That one cost, I believe, $70,000, one was over $200,000. And we had no clue that one was going to be any different than the other. So the downhole costs, what we use the 150 is what we're actually seeing for downhole costs. But those aren't based on risk ranking that we're using to identify which well to plug first, because that's more surface. The only exception potentially to that was maybe the Buckeye well, because we had fluid flowing to the surface. But again, I didn't know when we moved on to that well, we were going to end up with needing a snubbing unit to move, do work on that well because we could never get fluid control.
Okay. But you've acknowledged that typically the cost to plug a well would be cheaper for industry than it would be for the division, right?
Absolutely. They're
Okay.
plugging them typically years ahead of the division.
Right. And the reason for that in part is because you said by the time the division is the one to be in the position to plug the well, there's all kinds of other associated issues that add up the costs, correct?
Absolutely.
So I think it's fair to ask if the division can appreciate that, you know, industry feels like the proposal for a one well financial assurance is particularly high, correct?
So I would agree, but I think you have to look at the rule on making that category. It doesn't say bonding on what the industry is going to pay for that well. It's bonding to pay for what OCD is going to use to plug that well.
Right. And so let me ask you this. The division has not conducted a statistical study of plugging costs across a representative sample of wells that the division typically plugs, has it?
So I think the estimate was based on plugging costs in FY24. There was over 100 wells, I believe, plugged that year. And that's based on current market conditions. There was a significant upcharge in, I think, all industries seen in the last few years, especially post-COVID, where all costs are going up. So if we did an evaluation of what it cost us to plug 10 years ago, I don't think that would apply today because we're seeing costs rise. We're also subject to the procurement process with the state. We put the plugging contract out to bid. We accepted every plugging contractor that bid, and I believe we have 3 or 4 that bid, and that's who we're using to plug. And we haven't seen any significant difference between those vendors across the board in their plugging costs.
Wouldn't comparing OCD's actual costs with industry's actual costs across a broader, more representative sample of wells, probably over a longer period than since 2024, give the commission a better idea of what the costs actually are?
I don't think so because of the challenges OCD experiences when they're out there plugging. As in my direct, I've overseen thousands of wells plugged by industry. I've seen hundreds of wells plugged by OCD, and the failure rate, and I didn't run the actual statistics, but based on my experience, we see far more casing failures. I've seen far more challenges on a well-to-well basis with OCD's plugging because the well's being neglected. I can tell you it was either in Kano or Canyon, we had to look at the wells because there was fluid causing the red beds to swell, and it was sheared off casing on multiple wells in that field. Then we had to identify what we could do in those cases to, one, make it as cheap as possible and still provide protection. So we evaluated a whole set of wells expecting that same failure of significant casing failure where the red bed swelled and sheared off casing. I've never done that review with an operator's wells as far as that kind of broad review.
Okay, but you haven't asked to do that kind of review with operators or industry, have you?
Well, operators and industry submit our plugging sundries to the OCD, and on something at that level, I didn't see it when I was directly reviewing it, and staff hasn't brought those challenges to me on a widespread basis to make those kind of decisions.
Okay. Now, staying with the LFC report just for a couple of more questions. You're aware that the LFC report said that part of the division's procurement practices are responsible for the inflated cost to P&A. Is that correct?
I did see that.
Okay. So when you, well, okay, I'll move on. Now, you touched on when OCD last recovered a bond. I think you said that it's not accurate that they haven't recovered a bond since 2018, correct?
I never said that. I think Mr. Winchester stated that. I believe we have collected bonds. Again, that legal does that, but it's my understanding that at least on some of the Kano wells, we've collected bonds. The division did inaccurately state, I believe online, that those hadn't been recovered. We're working to address that. And we're currently in the process of recovering bonds through Kano, through our legal department.
Okay.
Or not Kano, Canyon. I apologize.
But you did testify that you haven't recovered very many bonds, correct?
Correct. A lot of times the bonds are so small that it makes more sense for us to package those, because usually we're working with the same financial institution to recover multiple bonds all at one time instead of going after each $6,000 bond. It may make more sense to go after them when those bonds get to $300,000. Those bonds don't go away as we're not pursuing them, but what we do is we build them up to a point where it makes more sense to get those in a package versus doing $6,000 at a time as far as our time to get that, because it takes attorney time. That attorney time is crucial when we're also going after enforcement. As we stated, there's 118 operators or 13 operators, whatever that new exhibit was, that haven't even reported production. Those are next steps on OCD enforcement. If we've got 20 or 30 of those, we've got another 80. The same attorney that's doing our bonds is also doing that enforcement.
So I think that raises a really critical issue in this proceeding that I'm not sure has been sufficiently fleshed out. And that is, under the proposed rules, it'd be $150,000 financial assurance per well, correct?
Correct.
And you just said, you know, if it's a $6,000 bond, it's probably not worth the division to pursue that bond, correct?
I didn't say it wasn't worth it. I just stated that it makes more sense to do it as a package.
Well, there's currently $250,000 blanket bonds that operators are required to have, correct?
Correct.
How many $250,000 blanket bonds has the division pursued in the last 8 years, say, if you know that?
Oh, you'd have to talk to our attorneys. I don't know offhand how many we've pursued. I do know as far as that's something we look at. I think if you look in Moss, that Moss spreadsheet, it identifies anytime there's a blanket bond attached. I will state a lot of the operators, because they were non-compliant, even with the 2018 bonding requirement, a lot of those aren't even 250,000. Some of those may still be 50,000.
Have you identified internally as a division the price point at which you would pursue a bond?
Again, I don't think we've put a price point, but I think at 6,000, it's more efficient to lump multiple of those together, and because they don't go away. So, theoretically, they're supposed to be non-revocable. Even if it was 150,000, if we're out plugging Kano or Canyon, and say we plug 100 wells in the year, it may make more sense to package 150,000s together to pursue those.
So the short answer to the question is you have not identified a price point at which the division would pursue a bond.
I think short answer is I don't think there is a price point.
Well, there is a price point for the single well $150,000 FA requirement, correct?
And we would pursue that just as we're pursuing the $6,000 bond.
Well, I hope that's the case if it's adopted, but there's nothing in the current rules that requires the division to pursue that $150,000 bond or any other bond, correct?
Boy, if we had a few $100 million in procured bonds out there, I think we'd get in trouble if we didn't. Also, the BIL federal funds requires us to proactively go after bonds as well. And as part of our funding package, that's another reason why we continue to look at bonds.
Okay, but my question was whether there's anything in the current rules that requires the division to pursue a bond.
No.
By delaying pursuing bonds, doesn't that also delay putting funds in the reclamation fund?
Yes.
Okay. So let's move on to beneficial use in marginal wells. I think the division has been clear that they support a presumption of no beneficial use. And at this point, I think that the BOE is less relevant than the 180 days, correct?
Well, the presumption of no beneficial use is a BOE and not 180 days, it's 90 days.
Okay. Now, is it accurate to your knowledge that the LFC data shows that most wells are plugged closer to 2 BOE per day?
I did see that, yes.
Okay. And that's approximately, I don't know, 8 times higher than your cutoff at OCD?
Well, I think they had the 2 as the low producing, which our comparison to the low producing is 1,000, which is 2.7.
Right.
So you're a difference between 2 and 2.7 BOE per day.
And you heard Mr. Wrinkle in his testimony say that 2.7 is economic, correct?
I think he said there was a potential if there's no extenuating circumstances. But I would also state, I don't think we ever stated that the 1,000 BOE was every well that was below 1,000 was uneconomic. I think we stated that that was at risk of potentially becoming an orphan in the future. And because of that risk, we were looking at bonding. I don't think we ever stated that was uneconomic. And I think in my testimony last week, I stated I wish we hadn't used marginal because it makes it that implication. We could have called it a well at risk of plugging, but it's not necessarily 100% economic or non-economic.
And, I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to touch on that, just for additional understanding of what the proposals are versus what it sounds like the division might, decide they could be. And it sounds to me like the marginal well definition itself is problematic because it has a certain understanding within industry itself, correct?
Well, I think the name itself, I think the way it's applied in this rule is fairly simple.
Okay, but it still could probably be more exact because it sounds like the division is more concerned with a certain type of well that's more high risk and a certain type of operator than maybe the rules ultimately encompass. Is that fair?
That's kind of a compound question. I wouldn't say it's a certain type of operator. I would say it's more of a certain type of well and how the operator utilizes that well. That's why we try to include the days in that, because what I'm concerned with is if a well isn't mechanically capable enough to produce 180 days a year, that may be a reason to look at that well. And if an operator is not looking at that well and taking that risk, should the state allow them to continue taking that risk, that well could end up not being produced for years and end up on our inactive list.
All right, let's move on to Mr. Powell, under the current rules, when a well becomes inactive, the operator is required to either plug or place it in temporary abandonment within 90 days, correct?
No, I believe it's a year and 90 days currently in the rule, if that's your question.
So 15 months.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you said that one of OCD's challenges is that it can't, I guess, take action until a well has been active for that 15-month period, correct?
Well, that's another broad statement. If there's a suspected defective casing, the operator is supposed to report that within 15 days and pursue with diligence. But if you're talking solely inactive wells, then it would be, yes, that 15 months.
Okay. So I guess the problem, from the division's perspective is that the rules as currently drafted fail to require timely plugging. Is that fair?
No, I think the way the rules are currently drafted, it has a beneficial provision even in Part 25 currently, but that's not defined. And the inactive wells that we're currently pursuing aren't the concern that we have. And I believe it's in my direct testimony, there was roughly 1,400 wells that produce less than 10 BOE in 10 days in an entire year. Those are the wells that we believe are on the cusp or are having potential defective casing issues, because we've seen that where a well's not consistently produced. And when the operator finally moves on, we find that it's not consistently producing because it has a casing failure or a wellhead seal issue or those kind of things. There's more of a mechanical problem that makes it where that well can't produce than just simply not opening the valve.
Okay. And I think you said that 29 out of 60 ACOIs were out of compliance. Do I remember that correctly from your testimony?
Boy, if you wanted my exact number, we'd have to pull it up, but that sounds about right.
Okay. Yeah, I think generally speaking, those numbers are what I recall you said. So would you say that some of the issues are not necessarily related to the rules, but perhaps, related to OCD's ability to enforce these ACOIs?
Boy, it's not to try to sound quip. It's not ACOI, so it's not us complying with it, it would be the operators.
Well,
Yes, we have to follow up with the operators, but at the end of the day, if there's non-compliance, it's the operator's non-compliance with that ACOI.
so I guess I'm just trying to understand like the resources the division has at its disposal. I know that they're limited. I'm just asking, would more resources enable the division to better enforce those ACOIs?
I would always advocate for more resources. You know, I'd love to double my staff,
Sure.
but I can't do that through this rulemaking.
Understood.
You know, ACOIs aren't even specifically written into the rule. It's a courtesy that OCD tries to extend to operators that are taking these challenging wells where the operator comes in, agrees to a schedule to bring them back into production, those kind of things. So it's not something that's written in the rule. It's a courtesy that OCD tries to help accommodate new buyers or existing operators to get back into compliance and bring these wells into a productive status.
And I hate to jump around, but let's tie that kind of concept back to the division's ability to pursue the bonds. Does the division even have the resources to pursue bonds if these financial assurance requirements are adjusted?
Well, I think I just previously stated OCD is pursuing bonds. We do plan on pursuing bonds. If we're pursuing $150,000 bonds versus $6,000 bonds, that's going to help the reclamation fund, I think, considerably and plug more wells in the long term. But the OCD is pursuing bonds and plans to pursue bonds going forward.
So I think that's great testimony, and I'm sure the commission appreciates hearing it. Is the division able to provide a quantification of the number of bonds they've actually pursued in the last, say, 8 years?
So I don't do that directly. You would have to ask our attorneys for that.
Okay. Are your attorneys able to provide that information?
I don't know.
Okay.
That's not something we had prepped for this case.
Madam Hearing Officer, I would just proffer to help move this along. I'm happy to share our three more recent FA forfeitures with the parties.
All right, thank you, Mr. Tremaine.
How am I doing on time, Madam Hearing Officer?
I have 28 minutes. Oh, no. Oops. 13 minutes.
Okay. Mr. Powell, let's talk a bit about the high-risk operator portfolio and the thresholds. This is under Rule 1915-89D3. You mentioned that the 15% threshold might be a bit aggressive, correct?
I didn't say aggressive, but I said a conservative.
Conservative.
I also said I expected industry to have some dialogue on that to see where that should be properly set.
Okay. But you think that it could be a workable number if it was, say, 30%?
I think it's definitely something to take a look at, whether it's 1 in 5 wells or 2 in 5 wells that aren't productive. I think it's still looking at the same threshold of making sure an operator is properly producing their wells.
Okay. Am I correct in my recollection that with respect to temporary abandonment, you would support greater flexibility with assessing how and why wells are put in that status?
I don't think I had testimony on that yet, but speaking of greater flexibility on temporary abandonment, I think if operators ran the logs that we're requesting to be added, showing that the well has mechanical integrity, showing the well is keeping that bridge plug down whole, which BLM already does, having those showing that well has no mechanical issues, and then having industry go to hearing and state what their long-term plan is. As long as that long-term plan is viable, has reasons for it, I think that makes a lot of sense. If they don't have a plan and they're just TAing it with no plan to hold the minerals but not ever let anybody produce it, I wouldn't say that's a good plan.
Mm-hmm.
But if they offered a good plan to show where they're planning on making that well a beneficial use, then I'm all for it as long as it meets those conditions.
Did you hear Commissioner Ampoma ask, I can't remember which of Welk's witnesses it was, but he essentially was concerned with flexibility for temporary abandonment in the case of like EOR and CCS, things like that?
I did. CCS, would be really careful with because of the criteria that the wells have to be constructed with. My understanding, EOR is something that the division looks at, and there's times where we look at casing integrity on EOR. I don't know that I would even limit it to EOR. I think you could have Hillcorp is a great example in the Northwest. I think they're doing a strong recomplete process. They're perforating other zones. If they brought in a plan that says we're going to TA all of these types of wells and we've identified this zone and here's our plan to develop it, that would make some sense. So I don't know that it's just EOR, but I think it needs to be a well thought out plan.
Okay, that's fair. Does the division support applicants' proposed change to the definition of beneficial use as also encompassing what they're terming speculative purposes?
I think on the speculative purposes, I see what the applicant is looking at. I call it, I've referred to it as the pie in the sky argument, coming in, I plan on using that well in the future. I don't know how, but I'm going to use it. I would say that speculative purposes. I think with a good plan, operators have a solid plan on what they plan on doing, and then they have speculative results until they do it. And that's where I would advocate is making sure you have a solid plan proposal, because again, this isn't due until I believe it's after the first 5 years. So if an operator hasn't developed a good plan in those 5 years, then that should be something that's looked at.
Okay. Did you hear Commissioner Ampoma ask Welk's witness whether if they adopted the definition of beneficial use and stopped right at the point where it goes into speculative purposes, if that wouldn't meet the requirements?
I would leave that to the commission and the lawyers on that as far as what it meant and what it looked like. And we would look, but as I stated, the speculative purposes, I would want something concrete if they took it to hearing, those kind of things. You're more looking at speculative results, but you should have a solid plan after the first 5 years.
When you say something more concrete, do you mean like a definition of speculative purposes itself?
No, I mean concrete when the applicant brings their plan is I want something concrete, not the pie in the sky analogy.
Okay. Now, before this rulemaking, I believe the division has assessed beneficial use or purpose through guidance documents more than anything else, correct?
As far as in current rule, if we've done it through guidance documents, I can't think of one offhand. I'm not saying there isn't one, but I don't think we fully, I don't remember ever defining what beneficial use is as it's currently written.
I think that's right. I think, as I recall, beneficial use is in the rules, but nowhere is it defined until this current proposal, correct?
Correct. I believe part 25 just says a well no longer being used for a beneficial purpose.
Yeah. Would it not be sufficient to keep terms like beneficial use and purpose to the realm of guidance because they're inherently broad and vague, because any number of things could be beneficial or speculative? Is that fair?
Boy, I think that's tough as a regulator. I think you get in the same scenario that I discussed with Mr. Winchester, where you assume something, or if we then issued guidance on what beneficial was, I think industry would call us arbitrary.
Well, I guess, wouldn't you agree that it's still arbitrary if the definition is fairly broad and is subject to substantial interpretation, correct?
I think, to me, the way the definition is applied in this rule has a very clear standard, at least to make that first step of the 90-90. And then operators can bring in their personal information, and then it's based on technical information that we're making those decisions. And if it's based on technical information that an operator provides, it's no longer arbitrary.
With the time I have left, I'm just going to touch on various provisions that I would like to get your take on. You're familiar with, I guess, the, agreement that OCC negotiated with Welk on the certification of compliance with various laws. Aren't you?
Very broadly, that was really legal heavy, and I kind of stayed out of that realm.
So I think the way that came down is that, you know, the operator upon transfers or registration would affirm that they would, you know, affirm to the division that they were compliant with state and federal laws. Is that accurate?
That is my understanding.
Now, is it your understanding that that state means the state of New Mexico specifically?
If I remember right, it wasn't just New Mexico centric, I think, and it wasn't based on accusations. It's non-compliance, if I remember correctly. It was non-compliance with any open violation. So if an operator, say, had a violation in Ohio and they resolved it, then that wouldn't be taken in consideration. But if they had an open violation in Ohio and then that was then out of compliance, I think that's what they were looking at. But again, this was really legalese, and I tried to stay at a high level because I get lost when I try to play a lawyer.
Okay. I mean, I think it's concerning to the industry as to whether the division even has the ability to look beyond New Mexico's borders at all sorts of other potential violations in other states. Isn't that a concern?
Boy, I'd leave that up to the commission, but if an operator in, say, Texas was severely out of compliance and owed the state of Texas millions because of their open program, I sure wouldn't want them as an operator in New Mexico.
Are you aware that many companies have altogether different teams of staff and professionals in other states than they do in the state of New Mexico?
I am aware of that. I've also worked with some of those teams when we've pursued non-compliant operators. We've reached out to some of our go states to see if they're having the same issues with the operators, and a lot of times they are.
So given that you've testified as to the division's limited resources in various areas, are you not concerned as the director that if operators are forced to get data from all kinds of other states, that the division will actually have the ability to evaluate what's in front of them?
So first thing, I'm not the director.
So deputy director,
I
sorry.
don't want that title. But I think it's a certification, and then it's the operator making a certification to the division. So if we're looking at a certification, then that's one thing. If we're then diving into all of their non-compliances, I think it is prudent for us to look at those non-compliances as needed and depending on what's identified.
4 minutes, Mr. Suazo.
All right, let me find other things I want to ask about with the time I have. Let me make sure, just one more thing to touch on. I want to make sure that I got kind of this recalculation that you had in your SIR rebuttal accurate. I think Mr. Garcia reported that 3,900 wells would be marginal under the proposed definition and therefore subject to the 150K single well bond. Is that right?
I don't remember what Mr. Garcia's slides had for specific numbers. If you pulled up our SIR rebuttal or our attorney, he can pull it up and I can testify to that because those were the numbers I currently ran.
Okay, but that chart that you put up and just went over with Mr. Tremaine, I think you said that only 1,600 and change of wells were classified as marginal under that proposed definition when the word "and" is used. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe so. So that would be marginal as far as that by itself. The other wells that are the 90-90 would probably still be considered as needing bonding, but just between the 90 and 1,000 plus the 180 days or less, it was that category. But if you're looking for bonding, you would probably have to add up the below 90 and 90, and then that one to look at what's going to be considered for bonding. I tried to put in there what filters I used for which.
So I guess with your revised Exhibit 16, there would be 3,494 wells impacted by the proposals, correct?
That sounds correct, yes.
And that number represents the high-risk wells that have historically proven problematic for the division in terms of plugging and P&A costs?
I think that number would include a gambit of things. It would include the 90/90, the less than 1,000. It does not include the wells that are already inactive.
And just to be clear, the 60,000 wells referenced in the LFC report and by applicants, those are not representative of the type of wells the OCD intends to target through this proposal, through this rulemaking, correct?
I think it's a subset of the 60,000. I think in what I provided was oil and gas alone. There's going to be other SWD wells that will be affected by this, that because Mr. Garcia didn't provide it and nobody asked for it, I didn't run those numbers. There'll be other wells that aren't in there that are used for like CO2, acid gas, some of those things I don't believe are affected. So the filters I ran at the top in getting the numbers that you have in Sir Rebuttal are for oil and gas wells only.
Okay.
Please wrap up, Mr. Suazo.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cloutier, do you have
Thank you,
other
Madam
questions?
Hearing Officer. Good morning again, Mr. Powell. We said hello off the record, but appreciate you being here. Let me start off with bonding questions. Mr. Winchester testified, and you commented on it, that of the last, well, first of all, do you know what the annual reclamation fund report is?
Oh, I would be speculating, but I think it was 60 to 70 million-ish.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you know what the report itself is that the director submits to the governor, the legislature?
I'm sure I pulled numbers for it, but without
I'm
looking
not
at it, I
asking for
couldn't
any
get into
numbers.
details.
I'm sorry. I'm not asking for any numbers. I'm just asking if you know what the report is.
Generally, yes.
Okay. And you have an understanding that each year the director has a category of income for the reclamation fund that is bond forfeitures, salvage, and reimbursement recoveries.
So I don't pull numbers for that. It wouldn't surprise me for this conversation, but I don't pull that information, so I haven't dealt with it.
And do you dispute Mr. Winchester's testimony that in 5 of the last 7 of these annual reclamation fund reports, the number of in that category has been 0?
With it being a public document, I'll take your word for it.
Yep. And that in the 2 years that there was collections in those 7 years, it amounted to just a little under $250,000.
Again, I haven't looked at it specifically, but it's a public report, so I'll take your word for it.
And they're all in evidence, and I'm trying to be accurate, Mr. Powell.
Sounds good.
And would you agree that until your testimony today, there wasn't any public information that any of the Cano bonds had been collected?
I believe my understanding, and again, it's a very high level, we missed updating that properly in the database. And we are working to rectify that, but that does not surprise me. So, it's very unfortunate, but it does not.
And so, for instance, Exhibit 29, which is a spreadsheet about financial assurances, still shows 0 next to every one of the Cano bonds in terms of what's been redeemed. That wouldn't surprise you?
I wouldn't.
Okay. Would you understand, with information publicly available like that, the Reclamation Fund and a notorious offender as far as the Reclamation Fund Cano showing 0, that industry would think that maybe bonding isn't that effective to protect the Reclamation Fund?
I think if industry would have reached out, we could have had a conversation that we do plan on pulling that. Again, we try to do it as a lump sum. I won't talk about hiring to a full extent, but the attorney that was working on inactive left at one point. We've had some turnover through the agency. That position has been filled. We've started doing that again. I think versus what we're spending out there. The focus has been staying out there and doing the plugging. And so that's where our number one focus was, to make sure we had wells to plug that needed to be plugged. And then we're working on packages of bonding to then reconcile.
Mr. Winchester also testified about Secretary Shelton's testimony before the LFC this summer, where he testified when asked about bonding collections and the low amounts of it. He said, quote, "The juice is not worth the squeeze."
On a well by well bonding, I would agree with the Deputy Secretary. There's times where we've got a $6,000 bond and it takes hundreds of thousands of dollars to plug the well. So until you package it as a package, pursuing them individually doesn't make any sense.
Let me, if I can ask Ms. Tripp to be able to share a screen, Ms. Apodaca, and ask her to share slide 12 of Ms. Romero's PowerPoint that's been submitted. Slide 12 of OCD exhibit 12. There we go. There, as on the first bullet point, Ms. Romero states operators who are not compliant with regulations related to site remediation and reclamation are more likely to leave wells unplugged and sites unreclaimed after ceasing operations. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
And I think in her testimony, she testified that this is based on her experience, not on any data-driven inquiry. Would your experience be similar and your observation be similar?
Very much so. If an operator is not expending the money to address their non-productive wells, they're probably not expending money to clean up those well sites either.
Sure. Okay, and you, for instance, just today testified about a new exhibit that listed operators who are out of compliance on C-115s.
Yes.
And I think you said 78 of them, those operators would have state or fee wells that would be subject to the bonding rules.
Yeah, 76 or 78. And then there's a subset of I think it was 12 or 1,400 wells that are state and private specifically.
Okay. Do you have any reasonable expectation which to tell the commission that you would expect any of those operators to comply with increased bonding requirements?
Boy, I don't think any of those operators are. I'm just hoping that future operators don't get to that position.
Do you, if we could get the statute 70-2-14A up, please, Ms. Tripp.
The rainbow one is great.
I know, but I
Apologies,
can.
Mr. Rankin has not shared that with us. We have.
That's Mr. Rankin's turf. He gets pretty mad if I step on it. So, and I want to there after the $50,000 there in the middle, it says one well plugging financial assurance in amounts determined to be sufficient to reasonably pay out the plugging. Do you agree that the amount of a single well bond, if the commission agrees it has the power to adopt this rulemaking, should be a reasonable amount?
I think it should be a reasonable amount to pay for the plugging of the wells. And again, because of where that's orientated, it's plugging of the wells by the OCD, not by industry.
Okay. Let's turn to applicant's exhibit number 4, page 24, which is, that's going to be the LFC report. Please, Ms. Tripp. All right. Oh, there we go. I'll tell you that the yellow highlighting is stuff I've added to the exhibit. The other highlighting was, I believe, as submitted. And I think the first yellow highlighting, which is a fair enough comment, is that the division is not particularly well equipped to deal with accounts payable issues with plugging contractors. And I want you to understand that I agree it's a complicated area, and I'm going to ask you some questions, and it's not by way of criticism, it's just by way of fact, okay?
That's fine. And I think if you'd like to discuss that, I think there's some accounts payable things that was not captured in this LFC report I can elaborate on as far as our processes that we have reached out later on and explained. But if we'd like to talk about accounts payable, I think if you'd like me to elaborate, I can dive into that a little bit more.
Well, let me ask you some specific questions if I can, Mr. Powell, and then if you think your answers are pertinent to those questions, please include and truly responsive, please do so. As I appreciate it, the division has been using in the Permian Basin contractors out of the San Juan Basin and even out of Kansas to plug wells. Is that?
So I don't know about out of Kansas. That may have been one of our other contractors, environmental or our methane monitoring. But the plugging companies that OCD is utilizing, most of those are orientated, or at least they were when the contract was acquired out of the San Juan Basin because they were who applied. I don't believe any southeast part of New Mexico plugging companies even applied to be a vendor in the state.
Okay. We requested invoices and the division provided them, and I'd like to go through some examples. Exhibit 45A, if we can. So do you see this Drake invoice? And I believe it's dated June 20th. Is that the?
Yes.
Okay. And if we could scroll down to the last entry. On the last.
Just a second. You want 45A, Drew?
That's what I have. Yeah.
Okay, just a second. Apologize. I have 45B ready for the analysis.
Sorry,
I can
that's
get
okay.
that one.
Still be, but well, let's look at that. If we can go to the work ticket on this B, please, Ms. Tripp, we'll just ask this question. I'm sorry about this. It's trying to coordinate remotely and Ms. Tripp trying to make up for my inadequacies screen sharing. So you see that you're being charged here, the division's being charged for overnight per diem, which is a result of a charge incurred because this is a Farmington-based operator plugging in the Cato unit in Chaves County, correct?
Correct.
And they're billing you for 10 people for overnight per diem?
That's what I see there, yes.
The division. And if we could go back to the work ticket, please, Ms. Tripp. You understand that these work tickets are part of the attachments to invoices. The operator submits paperwork justifying the invoice.
Yes.
Okay, and if we can go down to the number of employees there, so you're being billed for work by 4 employees, but paying per diem on 10, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
But I would
Please.
caution on that. That's the number of employees specifically tied to a rig, without actually looking into a specific well's details. I don't know if there's a truck driver from that company there. I don't know if there's seamaners included there. I don't know if there's a welder included there. Those 4 employees are typically tied to a rig. If you look at our actual contract, the rig requires a certain number of employees that's tied to the rig. All I can speculate is the other 10, maybe truck drivers, welders, seamaners, those kind of things.
And I will just tell you, Mr. Powell, I didn't see a work ticket listing anybody else other than these 4 for that day. So
I don't review these directly. Dating 2022, I would have to go back and look at the specific or get a request from the contractor to find out what they actually did and why.
Okay.
Without that, I would have a hard time speculating what the other 6 people were.
Right. Did we get to 4A?
Oh.
Ms. Tripp?
Just a second. I will find it.
June 20 invoice. Would it surprise you that on this June 20 invoice, that's the date of the invoice, you were being billed for work that supposedly was going to occur on June 28th?
That seems highly unusual, but I don't know if that's planned wellhead cut off or those kind of works, and they would bill it, and then if there was wrong, then correct it. I don't know.
Okay.
I would have to look, and I probably couldn't speculate here. I don't know why they did that. I would have to look at that specific occurrence and go back and see what information I could provide.
Okay. Do you have ST and U ready, Ms. Tripp?
Oop. Yes. You should be seeing 45S.
Seeing nothing yet.
Oh, so I'm not sharing a screen. Do you now
All
see
right.
45S?
Yes. So we're going to, Ms. Tripp, do the welder mileage, please. So we've got at the Cato 49, we've got a welder cut off 4 hours worth of work, 200 miles driven, correct? You see
Yes.
that, Mr. Powell? Yep. We can scroll down. And same day for the 27. Got a welder for 4 hours, drilling 5 hours for a well in the same unit. The Cato St. Andrews unit, the wells are in the same general geographic area, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Powell, just east of Roswell, north of Highway 380. It's a discrete geographic area where this Cato St. Andrews unit is, correct?
So I guess if my question, and I hate to ask questions, but it seems like the question is why are those both 200 when they're already in the field? I would say it's probably vastly farther to drive out of Farmington to down there than 200 miles. My only thought is maybe they took the mileage and split it between two wells. So they split equal amounts to each well so they could spread that drive mileage down instead of accumulating it all on one bill, but
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, and actually this same welder, it appears, billed 3 different times for the same day for the 200 miles. So
I don't know the mileage between Farmington and that well, but I would assume it's significant.
let's talk about your plugging regulation if you can for a bit.
Sounds good.
It's 1915, 2510. You're familiar with that regulation?
Yes.
And it requires, among other things, that in plugging, it's, quote, in a manner that permanently confines all oil, gas, and water in the separate strata in which they're originally found.
Correct.
Yep. And indicates that the operator, quote, may accomplish this by using mud-laden fluid, cement, and plugs singly or in combination as approved by the division.
Correct.
Is mud-laden fluid permissible plugging practice currently under division guidance?
So where mud-laden fluid was predominantly used, and I believe it's still used in some wells, is in between the cement plugs. So that is still allowed, is to have the mud-laden fluid. And the reason why that was in there is if the casing or the cement ever deteriorated, that there would be mud between those plugs, which also would help with the cross flow.
Okay. Where does the division currently require that plugs be placed in a well?
Generally or specifically?
Yeah, let's say a Yesa well in southeast New Mexico. I'm not. It's not a test of every formation, but
we do have plugging guidance out. Any individual formation must have a plug that covers the inside of the casing and the outside of the casing. If an operator circulated cement on the outside, we only spot additional inside casing plugs. We also spot anywhere where there's a DV tool, those kind of things where there has a higher potential, potentially leaking in the future. So it's mainly formation tops as they come up, each individual formation separated from each other.
Okay. And so, and again, I'm promising it's not a geology, but in a Yesa well, I would normally expect there to be Grayberg and San Andreas and maybe even Yates above it and maybe some other formations. Is that consistent with your recollection of the geology?
That sounds correct. When I'm dealing with Southeast geology, I don't have it memorized, so I would refer.
Okay.
If you want to talk Northwest geology, I have that pretty well memorized.
And I want the record to be clear and you to be clear. I'm not asking you to, I'm not trying to trick you. I'm just trying to get us in a conversation.
Yeah, that sounds correct.
So in that situation, let's say the casing was cemented in place. And so an operator is placing plugs, of course, at the top of the ASO formation. Is that correct?
Sounds correct.
Okay. That's the one they're producing from in our hypothetical example. And if the Grayberg formation occurs in that area, is there a plug on the top of the Grayberg?
I would hypothetically say yes.
Okay. And why is that if the Grayberg is not perforated?
Because casing and cement deteriorate over time. So it's after we leave the well and casing or cement and the well deteriorates, you don't start getting cross flow between that potential deterioration and other potential deteriorations. That's why we require each formation to be isolated separately.
Okay. And that answers my question. Thank you. And then I would expect if there's groundwater in the area, to be a plug set slightly below the groundwater level. Is that?
There could even be multiple groundwater plugs if there's multiple groundwater formations.
Yep. And that was going to be my follow-up question. So you answered both of them in one. Thank you. And are you familiar that in 2024, January 1, 2024, the division offered issued guidance indicating, among other things, that after setting a plug with cement, that the cure time of 4 to 6 hours needed to be observed before the next plug goes in.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Okay, what was the purpose of that?
So it was a standardized, my understanding, that's industry standard. 6 hours is for neat cement, 4 hours is if they add 2% KCl to the cement. What we don't want an operator doing is tagging early, because we're, again, looking for that solid plug at a formation top. If you tag early with either cement or with wire line, specifically after cement starts to set up, if you then push into that cement, you create a void inside of it with your tubing before you get resistance, and then you come out. So now you've created a void that after the cement starts setting up, it's not going to then reconsolidate back down to. So it's to make sure we get a good tag and reduce the risk of then taking away that perspective as a solid plug.
And do you understand that this creates downtime for the crew that's doing the plugging while they're waiting for the curing to occur?
They could do other work around the well, I guess, but theoretically, you're not doing anything down well during that cure time.
Right. And do you understand that has driven up the cost of plugging quite a bit with all these?
Frankly, I heard that mentioned in this rulemaking. I'm surprised it has, because I thought that was industry standard, API standard. So if that's not standard and it's curing faster, I'd like to have that conversation. But again, the goal is to not create a void in the cement plug you just spent your time to put in, so you don't create another void that then you have to replug again.
And I'm not questioning the wisdom one way or the other. That's beyond this lawyer's.
I would say if that's not what an operator was doing and they were tagging early and creating voids before that guidance came out, I'm glad we created the guidance.
Okay. And did you observe at the beginning of 2024 that your plugging contractors' charges went up after this guidance was issued?
Again, I thought they were doing that beforehand, but if they weren't, I'm glad we issued the guidance, because again, I've been with the division for 19 and a half years. I can tell you that's what, starting in 2011, I started overseeing plugging in the San Juan Basin, and that was always a requirement that I gave in the San Juan Basin, because that was a requirement that was relayed to me as industry standard.
Okay. How am I doing on time, Madam Hearing Officer?
You have 19 minutes.
Okay, good. I'm going to be wrapped up early, I think. I want to talk about the data issue with Mr. Garcia's testimony. You were present when he testified?
I was.
And you have offered a demonstrative, and I think it's been admitted into evidence, that corrects the number of wells that the 2024 production data would suggest would be affected by this rulemaking, correct?
Correct.
Right. And you understand that Mr. Garcia's numbers were presented as for marginal wells and no beneficial use wells in a manner, they were calculated in a manner that was not consistent with the definitions of those in this rulemaking, correct?
Correct.
Do you have an understanding? Mr. Garcia testified that you instructed him to so present the data, did you?
I did, and I'll explain that. I believe I hit that in my direct last week, but I had asked for Mr. Garcia to run the numbers so we could show what was affected. Unfortunately, I did not look at his slides before they were put into the record. I don't think I even seen the slides before his testimony. One of the things that I think was unclear in the direction that he was given, it says 90 days and 90 BOE, almost like they're two categories. Might have been clearer if that was 90 days, which only produced less than 90 days. may have been clearer. I will say that Welk's scatter plot of wells is what was intended when we wrote that, and what I gave numbers to in my server rebuttal.
And you would agree that Mr. Garcia did not talk about in his testimony, well, scatter plot, correct?
Absolutely.
And I want to be clear on my question. Did you instruct Mr. Garcia to present the data in a manner that was inconsistent with the definitions in the rulemaking?
No, I would say all of our intent, including Mr. Garcia's, was to present it in the proper manner. It was unfortunate that it was not what was intended.
Okay. Did you hear that he testified that he was so testifying as a quote warning shot, close quote, to industry?
I think he used that verbiage, and I think if you were to remove the days as suggested in my rebuttal, that may be, I think my numbers were probably more consistent with his. But with the days in there, I would say his is incorrect.
Do you understand that had IPA&M not brought that fact to the commission's attention, that the commission could have been relying on inaccurate numbers when it was considering this rulemaking?
Definitely conflicting information, because it looked like the OCD's information and Welk's information were very different.
Ms. Romero was very candid about how she applied her definition of marginal well. Are you aware of any other testimony or exhibit that the division submitted that represents itself as being consistent with the definitions of the rulemaking that is not?
Other than my exclude versus include in my server rebuttal, I believe we caught it all, and I apologize for those. I think Mr. Romero was very explicit on how she did it. I think Mr. Wrinkles, when he's talking marginal, he was talking more economics and not necessarily the definition.
That's a fair caveat. I should have included Mr. Wrinkle because he was quite candid about how he viewed it too.
So other than that, I'm not that I'm aware of.
Thank you. How does OCD go about issuing requests for proposals for contractors to bid on plugging work and reclamation work done using reclamation fund monies?
So the way we're doing it now, first, all of our vendors are on the statewide price agreement. Those are prices that the vendors locked in on a statewide price agreement. After the LSC report came out, we looked at that and understood that there may not be as much clarity as we would like in that process. So we have moved on. Anytime we have a job coming up, we identify that job, we send it out to the vendors to bid on that job now and provide us a scope of work. We evaluate their scope of work and their costs to evaluate which vendor we then pick to perform that job.
Okay. And did I understand your testimony earlier to say that the financial assurance aspects of the rulemaking would not apply to federal wells, but the presumptions of non-beneficial use would?
That's correct. We don't bond federal wells.
Okay. If BLM's looking out after the federal wells, why are you creating a presumption that's applicable to federal wells in this rulemaking?
So I would say us and BLM work together, as in Sir rebuttal on that extreme case that we're dealing with currently. That's a federal well that OCD is moving out and using reclamation fund money to respond to because of the government shutdown. We've also worked with BLM on other projects. OCD's been BLM's grant administrator for plugging, I believe it was a $5 million grant. OCD has always taken the stance that has authority, co-authority on federal lands, working with BLM. If we give a presumption of no beneficial use on federal lands and the BLM has a plan for that well, the operator would simply need to provide us with that plan, and we would more than likely side with BLM.
Okay. I'd like to conclude with two questions. First one is, how does this rulemaking prevent underground waste?
Way I hope it prevents underground waste is requiring operators to utilize their wells properly. A well that's out there not producing isn't providing any tax or royalties to the state of New Mexico, and versus a well that's operating 50% of the time is providing tax and royalties to the state.
And those taxes and royalties are beneficial to the state.
Absolutely.
How does the proposed rulemaking assist the commission in its duty of protecting correlative rights?
Again, very similar as when you're looking at correlative rights and mineral ownership. If an operator is not properly utilizing those correlative rights, getting them either to utilize them or plug them so another operator can move in to utilize them, I would say is protecting correlative rights.
Do you have an understanding that there are interest owners besides the operator in any given well?
Yes.
And do you have the understanding that among the working interest owners, for instance, if they're not satisfied with what the operators are doing, they can make their own proposals?
I don't deal with working interest owners a lot in my side of it. I believe like State Land Office does. I know there's been lawsuits where working interest owners take over as the operator and we have to transfer to those operators. But we typically work with the registered operator with the state, or with the OCD, I should say.
And it's a fair enough comment. You're not, you don't hold yourself out as having any expertise, for instance, in joint operating agreements.
Correct.
Right. Let me follow up two things that came up in our testimony, and I didn't anticipate having the time. So let me ask you, are you familiar with the concept of constrained takeaway?
No, I'm not.
Are you familiar with the fact that gathering systems are sometimes shut down so that producers in gas wells can't produce any gas?
I am familiar with that. I know on, say, new wells, there's times where it takes time for infrastructure to be built to the well. And I also know there's times where on existing wells, a gathering company is having issues with corrosion, those kind of things where they have to shut down a pipeline. And then it's evaluated whether they expend the dollars to put in a new pipeline or they work with the operator to then install new pipelines.
And in this rulemaking, there's no exception for an operator who can't meet, for instance, the 180 days if part of the reason for doing so in a 12-month period is because they didn't have any outlet for their gas production.
I think that's a very good point, but I also think it's something to be careful about because, again, it's a year plus. If it's changed to 30 days from 90, it'll be 13 months or 15 months. If there's a pipeline issue that extends past that, I have known of operators that a pipeline was never extended to their well. So as that well is sitting out there, if that's an operator's entire portfolio, that well may never be utilized again. So that's where the high risk in the bonding would come into play. If there's no long-term plan for that well, or the operator can't work with the pipeline takeaway to get a new pipeline connection in. Sometimes it's a meter issue and all of that cost. And I know there's times where a pipeline operator will defer those costs to the operator to some extent.
And you mentioned in the as far as the 13 months, would you agree that bonding requirement could kick in for an operator simply because a midstream company did not provide takeaway to the well for a period of time?
And I would say not it wouldn't be initial takeaway, but it would be prolonged takeaway because most wells we're talking about are wells that have been in production for long periods of time. So there would have to be a reason why that takeaway was then canceled, either a contract issue or a integrity issue of the takeaway.
All right. Mr. Powell, I appreciate your time. Thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cloutier. You've brought us very close to noon, so let's take our lunch break until 1 p.m.